So today's going to be a little bit all over the place. We're going to take a field trip down to the second floor, the second half of class, show you all of the media commons space. It's a work in progress right now, for sure, but at least you'll know that it exists, and it will be a space that we'll be using throughout the rest of the semester to shoot projects, eventually leading into our final projects. You don't necessarily have to use the studios downstairs, especially if you're shooting on location footage rather than in the studio footage, but you should at least still know it's available. It's really nice compared to our setups in the past. We had a little closet in the Metro Tech building, which was better than nothing, but this is a lot better, and it's just right downstairs. And it's all fully decked out for motion capture too, although we don't really spend too much time on motion capture in this class. Perhaps we could do something as a show and tell later on in the semester. So we'll be doing that in the second half of class. We'll all rally down there after our break. Prior to that, I have a little lecture here today about kicking off our match motion journey, which is the meat of our semester is match motion 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's a lot of stuff for us to cover. Match motion is what allows us to stick CGI into video footage and make it look like it actually moves with the camera and stuff. So we'll start talking about that right now. Then I will give a little quick show and tell about the camera that we have access to. It's the nicest camera in the department, probably. If not, then one of the nicest. You don't have to use this camera, but I don't know why you wouldn't want to. So we'll go over that as well. So a lot of moving parts today, a little all over the place. So we'll make the best of it. All right. So this week we'll kick off our first match motion. Then next week we will get into actually beginning to track in After Effects and stick graphics to things. Next week will be purely After Effects, which we're using as our tracking software. We won't get into the 3D part of that next week, but the tracking part is essential. And you'll start to see things come together next week. The week after that, that's when we take our camera track from After Effects over into our 3D program. In this class, historically, we've used Maya. Unfortunately, the plugin between After Effects and Maya has not been updated in a couple years, so it's a little bit of a pain in the butt to install old software. So I've ported everything over to using C4D and After Effects, which they work pretty nicely together. So we'll be using that. You don't have to use that, but that's what I will show you. And then our final match motion class in a couple weeks from now, closer to Halloween, or I guess not the class before Halloween, but the week before that, we will bring all that 3D camera tracking into Unreal. We bring it all together. So we're diverging from Unreal for a couple weeks to talk about all the camera tracking stuff. And then we're going to go back into that. Okay? So don't forget about Unreal. We'll be back. You can see we take a little break from it a couple weeks there. Our little Unreal logo doesn't pop back up till week 8. Okay, any questions about any of that before we get started? I know there were a couple problems with the assignment and stuff that people were having. We can talk about those later. All right. So creating a match motion pipeline. This is our journey begins today. Step 1 of our match motion pipeline. This is what our pipeline looks like. So we're using After Effects as our camera tracker, which identifies features in the environment, whether they are scratches on the table surface, markers on a green screen, freckles on somebody's face. The software identifies features that allows us to stick graphics to it, essentially. There are lots of different camera trackers out there, a lot that are better than After Effects, but After Effects is the easiest gateway for us into this world. It works pretty well. From that, we'll be using the 3D softwares of either Cinema 4D or Maya. If you can get this pipeline to work with another software, I don't care. That's fine. But that's also on you to figure out. The 3D has a lot of software in it. Somebody decides to take their own road, I can't help you as much. Everybody's specialized at certain softwares. So if you can make this work with Blender, more power to you. But I'm gonna have to watch a few 13-year-olds on YouTube teaching me how to use Blender before I could help. All right. So after we do that, we convert our camera track from 2D into 3D in those softwares. And really, if it wasn't for this class being an Unreal class, we could stop there. If we wanted this to be a traditional VFX class where we render everything in a 3D program like Cinema or Maya or Blender, we could completely get rid of the Unreal part. The reason we use the Unreal part because we don't have time to render everything, right? And some people are struggling to run Unreal, let alone render C4D renders for a couple hours, a couple days maybe. We don't got time for that. So that's why we bring Unreal back at the end. So 2D to 3D, and then into a real-time gaming engine with Unreal. And then perhaps at the end, we circle all the way back to After Effects to do our final composites, sort of like how we did with Photoshop, and some of you have been doing with After Effects already. Also, that might be an opportunity for us to talk about Resolve too, which I think is Resolve and Fusion, which are a little bit more powerful than After Effects. But we'll see. Lots of stuff to cover. So, we're using Unreal primarily as a filmmaking tool in this class. We're using it to make pre-rendered videos at the end of the day, right? We're also going to use Unreal in this class to do our previs, to do virtual production related things. Some of you have had virtual production related classes in Unreal already. That's really exciting stuff. We're not really using, After Effects is not a world building software that we're going to use in that fashion in this class. First off, After Effects is 2D and Unreal is 3D. We're using Unreal as our world building software. And like I said, we may circle back to do some more deeper compositing if time allows, and y'all don't hate me for getting more technical later in the semester. So I want to show you some examples first off. The simplest thing that we could do to bring video footage into Unreal is kind of what we've already done on some level. You could do a lot of stuff without doing all this match matching stuff that we're going to cover. If you just set up the camera on a tripod, set it on a table, shoot your little scene in front of it. All right, maybe you cut out the video footage on green screen, bring that into the world. You're done. You don't have to worry about camera tracking because there's no camera movement, right? Doing camera movement is a lot of work. It's a big pain in the butt to do. That's why we're spending a third of the semester talking about it. But it's also adds so much more realism to your footage. See, when your camera moves this way, you get that parallax shift between your subject and the background. It's that sort of movement that really makes it feel that much more alive and immersive, I think. That being said, still, I'm going to show you some examples of things that could be done just with a locked off camera. You can still do lots of stuff, and it's a heck of a lot easier. As far as like a requirement for your final projects, I'll be disappointed if nobody does camera tracking for the final project. But if you make a real kick-ass looking project without a lot of camera tracking, that's fine. At the end of the day, it's just about making really cool looking videos in these softwares. But we are going to spend a heck of a lot of time on this. So I'm going to show you a bunch of examples of no match motion and kind of talk through them a little bit. I think all of these examples are of my own, so I did them, so I know how to do them. If somebody can remind me when I am showing some videos to mute the audio so I don't get a takedown notice from YouTube, that would be awesome. This one's okay. So this is like a 12-year-old project, Unreal Engine 3. It's funny we called it Brave New World because it was our first idea of starting to use Unreal as a filmmaking tool. Nobody was really talking about this back then. And all the video footage here, and there's no camera tracking, there's no any of that. All it is just video on flat planes placed in the environment. And, you don't get the parallax shift as we go by people. You don't get the perspective changes. You can definitely tell that it's flat video, but you can still do a lot. So I would say that, this is one of the more simple approaches that you can do. You still got to be careful. Keep the camera relatively straight onto your subject. You can do a little bit of camera shifting around and get away with it, but if you go right up close to them or whip around the sides, the illusion starts to break down really quickly. Watch a couple more of these characters. I think this one works really well. Shadows cast in the environment. So if we brought camera tracking into this, we could get those perspective shifts. And that overhead shot, as we came over the clown's head, we would see the top of his head. Watch this one and see how you think this one was done. There's no camera tracking here, but the camera wrapped around her. How did that happen? If you start to be clever about things, you can do little hacks to fake things out. Anybody have any idea how you would do something like that without camera tracking? Or without camera movement? The camera did not move. Any ideas? Nailed it. Yeah, so she's on a Lazy Susan platform that's spinning at the same rotational rate as the camera's swooping around her in Unreal. Put all that together, nobody knows. Heck of a lot easier than doing the camera tracking and all that sort of stuff. So this project's super ancient of mine, but I still really love it just because there's so much different video elements going on. Never really thought at the time about doing any sort of camera tracking because frankly I had no idea how to do it. Yeah, so if it wasn't for this, wouldn't be having this class. This was really a big test for us project-wise. All shot on the most simple green screen. Remember that window light that I was telling you in my apartment? That's what this is. 9-foot roll of paper, no tracking marks, quite simple. Camera didn't move. Oh, you got to watch out for the sun right there coming in the bottom. We only got about a half an hour left to shoot. Remember I told you about my beautiful blonde hair? That's actually my beautiful black hair there. What happened? No, that's a wig, but... A couple more examples. So this one, also on a turntable, Lazy Susan, whatever you want to call it. Unreal Engine 3. I think still really holds up. So rotating the platform and then just matching that duration and kind of estimating the angle in Unreal. Sync it all up together. Similar sort of thing here, but I like the other one better. So I've been thinking about these things for a long time and figuring out clever solutions to solve those problems. Of course, things became more technical. This is a little BTS footage here. You see she's just a flat video plane as we've been working with. And then there's just a little nook carved out for her. I remember doing this and telling people, oh, I'm using a gaming engine called Unreal as a world building tool to make videos. And you're like, gaming engine? What are you talking about? Like Grand Theft Auto or something? Like, no, not exactly. It's kind of like Unity. Oh, okay. This one's pretty straightforward. It's me and my children. I like the pizza best. The other one's like, whatever. So locked off camera again. Even more simple. No lazy Susan. None of that stuff. And all these techniques that we look at over the next couple weeks and that we've already done, don't forget about them. You could use them all in a final project. You could use no camera tracking in the parts of the final project too. There could be scenes with zero VFX. The whole thing doesn't need to be a VFX camera tracking extravaganza, Use the VFX as a tool to tell the story that you're trying to tell. Also don't have like 10 minutes of a conversation at a kitchen table that has zero VFX and then there's like a little sparkle that happens for 1 second. You're like, okay, that's what I did in class. That's not enough. We'll talk about that when we get closer to the final project. But all these techniques can come together. It's funny, this started as that sketch. The snowmen got killed off. Oh yeah, that's me. I had red paint. Yeah, that's my natural color. Halloween's coming up, so I'll probably come into class like with residual clown makeup on one day. Always a clown. Doesn't even have to be video necessarily. These are stills. Stills of the gals here and then incorporated into the environment. Gives a different sort of an effect to it. There is a little bit of puppet warping done in post-production to the still picture just to give them a little bit of subtle ambient movement. This is a project for Cartoon Network and Powerpuff Girls. Also still, her hands are puppet warped a little bit. Cut out. My favorite part is the little manicure little bots that fly around her hands. Complete revolutions around her hands. So these were just still pictures done for zero budget on the tiniest of green screen. The one on the left wasn't even shot on green screen. She was shot on just a black backdrop because the green we didn't have enough room to work with, and it was given way too much green screen spill. And we knew that she was going to go on a dark backdrop anyways, so just manually cut it out. It's just a still picture. Easy enough to cut out, right? I guess after you rotoscope enough videos, still pictures become less intimidating. This is just a pullback set of that scene. Whenever I'm working on projects, I always love to take screenshots of in progress and just save them in a folder, behind the scenes folder. It's always fun to go back and look at. So pure VFX shots mixed with green screen shots. I think I lost a few years of my life trying to film these kids for this project. Whew. You don't want to listen to the audio of those raw files. God damn it. I think I showed this before, but a little bit more context now. Lazy Susan style, locked off camera. Shooting my kids, you think I need something to worry about, like camera tracking while doing that? There's enough to worry about. But so much camera movement here, right? So you can do a ton of stuff without worrying about match motion at all. And she's just shot on 12-foot roll of green paper with her dad laying on the ground like an idiot. I'm in a very grumpy mood right here. But it came out really good. Although those blue shoes were a little pain in the butt to key out on that green. This was like a $20 Lazy Susan built from Home Depot parts. Probably like 15 years ago, and just kept it. What's that? They have like kitchen cabinet Lazy Susans at Home Depot. They're like $5. Yeah, and it just has the mounting plates attached with ball bearings. Something a little bit more commercial. This is also completely locked off cameras. Just there wasn't really a reason to worry about it for this shoot, for this music video, or the budget to have a DP that understood how to use this stuff. But still, also an example of being able to do a lot with no camera tracking. I'm going to mute this one because there's licensed audio. So pullbacks, things like that are fine. This is a giant Lazy Susan to do that. Push-ins and pull-outs do quite a bit. That worked out all right. So you can do a lot with no camera tracking, but you don't get the advantage of the perspective shifts. You can't do dramatic things where you have big camera movements and have it hold up. Camera tracking just adds a level of realism that I think is just amazing when it all comes together. It also can be really annoying when it doesn't work. Maybe your footage is problematic for whatever reason. Maybe you just can't get the camera to track and it's kind of jittery. We will experience all of these hardships in this class with your own footages. So I'm just preparing you for that. We do camera tracking whether it's on green screen or not. I would say that the real world, if you're shooting on a real location, it's easier because there's features everywhere, right? There's even this white wall, there's marks and scratches on it. On the floor, there's lots of different features for the camera software, not the camera software, but for the 3D tracking software to lock onto. In a green screen environment where we artificially eliminate the background by turning it all green, yeah, there's scuffs in the paper and shadows and stuff like that, and holes in the paper, sure. But the idea is to make it pure green, right? So we have to reintroduce features for the software to track. That's where the tracking marks come in. We'll talk about tracking marks and best practices for that in a little bit. So like I was saying briefly earlier, there's lots of different tracking softwares. We'll be using After Effects because it's basically free to us as students, and After Effects is an easy software to learn compared to other stuff. If you've never used a 3D camera tracker before in After Effects, it ultimately looks like this. It places a rainbow cornucopia of tracking marks on the surface of the thing that you're trying to track. Like in this case, these bricks on the ground. You can see there's also some tracking marks on some of the plants in the house in the background. And then there's this big target here. The target is supposed to be aligned with what's called the ground plane or the grid. Basically, the surface that we want to place the CG elements on. The software is determining that ground for us. So when the camera moves, whether it's handheld or on a dolly or on a boom arm or on a drone, however it's moving, when that camera footage moves, that target will stay aligned to the ground. And then anything you place on it will stay aligned to the ground, assuming it's all lined up. You'll see as we move into 3D, it's very important for us to place things on the grid. If we place things above the grid even a little bit, you will see that there's drift that happens. It won't look like it's on the ground because it's actually floating. It won't be wrong, it just will be floating rather than stuck to the ground. We'll get into all that over the next couple weeks. Cinema 4D and Blender also have camera tracking, but you need to have a deep understanding of those softwares to really take advantage of it. They are not easy softwares to learn, so that's why I've chosen not to use them as trackers. I also am not well versed with either of those softwares. I know bits and pieces of cinema pretty good, but not comfortable enough to teach. And, it would be another thing for you to have to learn that we can't learn in 15 weeks. So that's why we're using After Effects. Again, if you would like to and you want to take on that challenge, cool, go for it. That would eliminate one step of the process. Other camera trackers are very expensive and proprietary. There's a really great one that I use sometime that's called Buju. It's made by Vicon. Vicon makes motion capture cameras, and it's fantastic. The UI looks like it's from the late 90s, but it works amazingly. And it was created to do camera tracking for Hollywood films. If later in the semester when you're working on your projects, if any of you are struggling to make it work with After Effects Camera Tracker, perhaps we can plug it into one of these other softwares and see if that works better for us. There's also Mocha Pro. Mocha Pro will do planar tracking and also camera tracking. Mocha Pro is not free. There's Mocha AE, After Effects, that comes included with After Effects, but that's just for planar tracking. It's just for sticking things to flat surfaces. It's not for doing 3D camera solving, which is what we need to do to place 3D objects into an environment. Buju is about, I think, $5,000. Mocha Pro is a couple $1,000s. I'm not sure. I haven't looked recently at how much these things cost. Mocha AE is free, but no camera solving. PF Track is really good. We're talking a couple $100s rather than thousands of dollars. Synthesize, believe it or not, actually the very first camera tracking software that I ever used, probably about 20 years ago. And I think it's like $200 to $300. Works really well. So there's a lot of different options to use. But we'll primarily be using After Effects unless you have big time problems. Any questions so far? A lot to do today, so I'm kind of racing through things. Stop me if I'm going too crazy. So match moving is the process that we're going to be talking about for the next couple of weeks and what you will ultimately be doing for your final projects. We've talked about this in one of our very first classes. Match moving is the technique that allows us to put computer graphics into live action footage, whether that's shot on green screen or out on J Street or in this room. It allows objects in 3D to correctly position themselves, rotate themselves, and scale based off of their relationship with the actual real-world camera movement of the video footage that was shot. It's a long explanation of basically saying sticking computer graphics onto things and making them look like they belong. You guys, it's funny, like with the relative ease to do things like augmented reality these days, sticking 3D graphics to real world surfaces is not a novel thing anymore, right? It's like fairly simple, dare I say, to do, which is always kind of funny to me because somebody in class will be like, oh, this is kind of like a Snapchat filter. Like, oh my gosh, I just told you about this $5,000 software, man. So, as technology progresses, yes, a lot of these techniques have gone mainstream in some ways. Obviously, there's limitations to those things. So we're looking at the very kind of hardcore VFX style of doing things, which, at least for a couple more years until the AI completely puts everybody out of business, this is still how things are done. So putting this robot guy into that real world footage in the background, we need to solve for that 3D camera. You're going into Times Square or wherever, filming video footage. It's actually a retired software made by Autodesk called Match Mover. Makes sense. This was for camera tracking. All of those little lines right there are tracking the features that the software is locked onto in the image. And it's from those features that we're able to extract and calculate the depth and the position of things. So next time you do an augmented reality filter from Instagram or something like that, just know there's a lot going on behind the scenes. So real world footage, and then overlaid just for reference purposes, I like to lay over grids or checkerboards on top of things just to make sure things are aligned sometimes before I go and move on to the content creation part of things. So, that surface, that table surface there with the cones, you can see that the cones are aligned to the tips of the table, the four corners of the table, and then also the grid or the checkerboard is aligned to the flat surfaces, the planar surfaces of this is a skateboarding park, I guess. Yeah. So if we were to play this footage, I don't have a video of this, it's just a screenshot. But if you were to play this, you would see that everything sticks to the surfaces. And if these things stick, your test objects stick to the surfaces, then your real world objects are going to stick, or you're not your real world, but your actual content is going to stick as well. Obviously, tracking is only one part of it. Think about lighting, shadows, that sort of stuff. If you take, robot guy here, and you don't light him appropriately for that dirt road in the background, it's going to stand out, obviously. It's going to stand out like a lot of our composites that we've made so far this semester. We haven't put a lot of time in yet of shooting custom footage for the environments that we're making. But that's kind of the goal going forward, is you have an idea in your head of the backgrounds that you're going to put things into, and then you go and light those scenes appropriately in the studio, on location, wherever. Another example, this one's on green screen here. We talked a little bit about this last week about how shooting full body on green screen is difficult to key things out because the shadows between people's feet and stuff, it's really difficult to eliminate those. I don't know if you can tell with the grid overlay here, but this guy's actually standing on a big green box. So he's elevated a little bit. So his body shadow is very much diffused because it's farther away from the ground. You still have the shadows from his feet, but don't have to worry about his body so much. So something to think about when you're shooting green screen. Try elevating the person if you're having problems with shadows. So this right here would be a diagram of the pipeline, the VFX pipeline for match moving. So it starts off with 2D. We shoot our original footage, right? That original footage could go to a rotoscoper, which we talked about last week. You need to cut that person out. Why do you need to cut them out? So you can put objects behind them, right? Or if it's green screen, you need to put objects behind them. Whether it's green screen, you need to completely cut them out, or if you just need to cut out, part of their hair because, something goes behind them slightly. You could pass that off to a compositor at the end of the process as well. In tandem, this original footage is going to a match mover. Match mover sits right there in the middle, in between the worlds of 2D and 3D. It is the match mover's job to take two-dimensional footage, which is what video is, or photos too. Photos and video take the 3D world and they flatten it down into a pancake, right? Two-dimensional pancake. It's the match mover's job to take that pancake and rip it back open and turn it back into 3D. That's what the match mover does. Match mover also then will pass that off to a modeler, 3D modeler, environment builder, animator, any sort of technical director if they're doing effects. And then all that 3D stuff will get made. And then we'll jump back over into the 2D side of things again with a compositor who bakes everything together into a final composite, cleans everything up, works with all the mats that get exported from the 3D softwares, assembles all the different render layers together. And then we end up with the final footage. So in our case, in this class, we are kind of all of these things. In a production, actual production at a studio or something like that, there's half dozen different people on each one of these steps sometimes, but we're going to kind of do all of these things. And perhaps, it's a little early to talk about it, but perhaps for your final project, members of your team are specialized in different parts of this process. Perhaps somebody wants to take on the role of the world builder and someone just owns that. We last semester I did this class, we had a couple photographers in the class, like they knew everything. And so they took on that role. They were going to film the footage, and it worked out great because they knew what they were doing. They understood lighting, that sort of stuff. So once we get to that point in the semester and we form up groups and stuff, perhaps you can take on more specialized roles because that's realistically how the industry works. Me, most of the time, I'm a one-man band. Oops. These are some of my very first match moves ever. These are all preliminary tests to see if this was even possible to do. Now, these are way over a decade old. Wouldn't it be cool if we could stick robots to our apartment floor? Even put tracking marks there because the concrete floor was kind of featureless, too smooth. That's my lovely wife and partner, Pamela. On the left here, this is a different sort of shot because it only has a wall. I'll tell you right now, it's much easier to do the one on the right than it is to do the one on the left. The more depth information that you can record with your camera, a floor and a wall, perhaps foreground elements even, you're gonna have an easier time doing a camera solve for that. With the wall right here, there's the water bottle in the foreground. I know, an amazing test subject, but it kept its mouth shut and didn't move around, so it was perfect. That element is a foreground element that helped do the camera solve. But if that water bottle was a person, it's actually a little bit more problematic than you might think, because that person is not holding still. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second too. So if you want to make things easier on yourself, don't shoot close-ups. If you want to do close-ups, the After Effects camera tracker, it will fail more times than not, I would say. So we might have to use some other camera trackers. So just planting that seed in the back of your head right now. Like I said, the match motion artist takes the two-dimensional or the 3D world, a photograph gets taken of it or video gets taken of it, converted to 2D. The match motion artist's job is to take that photo or video and turn it back into 3D so that we can put a 3D model into it, like the car, and then composite it together, complete with shadow and lighting and all that sort of stuff. Some of you may be familiar with photogrammetry, taking a lot of pictures of something and then all those photos get stitched together to create 3D models. Match motion is not all that different from that principle. It's a similar sort of thing. Both concepts or techniques, I don't even know if I would consider them techniques, both processes require feature tracking. Okay? So in a photo or a video, I guess a video is just a series of photos. So in a photo, the software detects the corner of this guitar or something like that. That information is not enough for us to place that anywhere in 3D space. We need more pictures, we need more angles to be able to start to do those things. What makes for a good feature to track? Something that's high contrast, something that is static, not moving, whether it's on green screen or in the environment, something that is just an identifiable feature that's not moving, and high contrast is a good feature to track. If we locked on to two features in an image, like the corners of this piano bench, the software can start to lock off. It could start to check off some boxes to be able to solve where this is in three-dimensional space. If we lock two features, we eliminate some rotational elements. In this case, we know that we're not spinning the camera movement anymore because it's locked onto those points. We can only do pitch at this point, just in this example. So we've locked off our rotational axis to one axis here. And we're just talking about rotation at this point, not position in 3D space. If we track three features, then we've locked all rotational axes. It's not spinning anymore. It's not pitching anymore. That's where it is. It's locked because we've identified 3 points. But what about position? I don't know. How do we solve for that? And this is true with photogrammetry too. To make photogrammetry work, what do we need a lot of? We need a lot of images. We need a lot of positions, right? We need to be able to see those features from different angles, right? That's what makes this all work. That's why when you do photogrammetry of a room and you're standing in the middle of the room, you don't just go like this. You have to actually translate your body around the space and shoot because you need those different parallaxes. That's what makes all of these calculations work. Same thing for match moving. So if I have two images here, and I draw a line through the corners of this bench here and the corner of the bench from this other angle, somewhere in 3D space, those line segments are going to overlap. Where they overlap, I've triangulated in XYZ position that feature's position in 3D space. Ta-da! Now we do that a couple hundred or 1,000 more times, and we're able to extract actual depth information from a scene to make a 3D model, to do a 3D camera solve, either of those. So some camera movement here around the bench. Parallax is our friend. That shift between the foreground and the background is our friend. Can you do camera solving on a tripod? Yes. That's called a nodal pan, where the focal node of the lens, it doesn't move around, it just rotates. So if you have camera on a tripod and you're just panning it, the position of the focal point of that lens is not moving, as if you actually translated it around the room. You need to usually tell the software that you're doing a tripod pan or something like that. Usually, if you tell it that you're doing a tripod pan, the softwares have drop downs. Like, is this free movement or is this a tripod pan? You select tripod pan, usually then it will be able to figure it out. Sometimes it can't. After all that, we've solved our camera. Ta-da! We can stick 3D objects into it now. It's a lot of stuff, huh? It's not a requirement for this class, but there is this really great book, and actually on Amazon, at least last time I checked, if you do like the preview where you click on the book and it gives you some of the preview pages, most of the good stuff is able to be previewed for free. Pro tip. Otherwise, if you're really interested in getting into the nitty-gritty of how this technically works and you want to geek out about it a little bit, it's a really great book. Get the second edition, not the first edition. Comes highly recommended from me. Or look at the free preview. So more times than we would like, our 3D camera tracker, whether it's After Effects or some other sort of tracking software, will fail. It will look like this in After Effects, and it will be very sad. And you will get very depressed. I get depressed. I'm depressed right now just looking at this. This is miserable. After Effects, like I said, it's not as good of a tracking software, but it's also kind of a push button solution where you just click the button, all the stuff happens, and it's good to go. So you'll get this a lot more. I think that I'll give you some tips for things that will definitely trigger this, but really it's kind of a live and learn sort of a thing. You just need to do tests and get familiar with what works and what doesn't. So this is what we're trying to do. On the right there, you can see the little dots in the grid. Those dots correspond with different tracking features on the left in the video footage there. Those features have been extracted, and then that little yellow with the blue line on the right there, that's the camera. The yellow view, the field of view of the camera is the yellow box, and then the blue line is the camera movement there. Seems like the camera's on a track. Oh yeah, you can see the track in the shot right there. So that's what we want to see. We want to be able to see bunches of dots on a back wall, bunches of dots on a floor, perhaps some dots on the person in the room. Then we know we got a good track. If you have a bunch of dots that don't look anything like your scene extracted for 3D, that's not good. But we'll get there. We will go slowly through all of this stuff over the next couple weeks. So if things fail to solve, it can be for a number of reasons. In this case, A lot of motion blur. Camera whips, whip pans. You're going to lose your camera track. 100%. If that happens, maybe you fudge it a little bit manually, fill in those gaps because it's a quick pan. Nobody will notice, right? It's quick. If it's blurry footage, all of those beautiful features, all those beautiful tracking marks that you put on the green screen, or all those rocks out on the ground that you're using as features to track, when you whip the camera around, they all turn into a mush. Software is like, oh, I don't know what that is. What do you want me to do? And yeah, that's not the software's fault. That's our fault for not recognizing that would be a problem. Other sorts of things that could be a problem. No parallax. If there's not actually more camera movement, can make things easier sometimes because there's more parallax. There's more information for the camera to solve. In this case, a problem is this guy in the foreground. The guy here is talking to the camera about something. I don't know what it is. I don't know what I stole this picture from. But, he's waving his arms around. He's probably very passionate about match motion that he's explaining, sort of like me. And that can screw the software up too. So what's the solution in that case? You get rid of the guy, right? Mask him out, which can be a real pain in the butt, especially if they are moving around a lot. That's going to be a lot of masking. We are trying to solve the camera position for the environment. We're not trying to solve the camera position for this dude, right? So the dude is causing us problems. Let's kill the dude by masking him out. So that's one possible thing that can help you avoid this problem. Not always. You don't always have to do this. But if your scene doesn't have a lot of depth information to begin with, perhaps because it's just a wall shot, a close-up wall shot, like this is, you may have to do something like this. It doesn't have to be a tight mask or rotoscoped out or anything like that, but just get the moving foreground out of the way. Other things, camera movements too fast because it makes it blurry. There's not enough depth information because it's on a tripod. Like I said, if you click the drop down for tripod pan solve, most of the time that makes it work, but tripod pans can be tricky, especially with the After Effects solver. Moving foreground elements like I talked about with the guy. So last semester we did this class, I think everyone or all the groups did green screen. That's absolutely fine. A green screen, I think, is more difficult on some level because you need to worry about keying. You need to put enough tracking marks on the background that you can solve for the camera, but not too many that it becomes a real pain in the butt to clean all those tracking marks up. But, I think probably at least half of the groups will probably end up doing green screen. So what sort of tracking marks should you use? They come in all different shapes and sizes. There's not really any rules for what you use. Again, a tracking mark is just a feature for the software to lock onto. Whether it's green or black and white or orange, whatever. The software doesn't care what it is. But something that you need to consider is that, well, you decided to shoot on green screen for a reason, right? Because you want to remove the background. If you go and you fill your green screen with a bunch of orange tracking marks, congratulations, you solved for your camera, but now you got to remove a bunch of orange tracking marks from behind your subject that you shot on green screen, right? So it's a give and take. How many tracking marks do I need to use versus how much post-production do I want to do to clean those things up with rotoscoping? If it's orange like that and your subject doesn't have a lot of orange in them, You can try to do another color key to get rid of those. Personally, I like to use green gaff tape. Green gaff tape on green paper. That's fine. I don't like to use these black and white things very much because it's just more work. You'll see these sorts of shapes on big film shoots a lot of times because they provide a lot more information. This little mark right here is not just one tracking mark. It's probably like, I don't know, 100 tracking marks. Every tip of the triangle is a tracking mark. The outside tips, the inside tips of the triangle are the tracking marks. The outside and the inside tips on the inner triangle. The cross is actually doesn't come to a point, it actually comes to a rectangle. On the rectangle, there's actually 2 points to track. There's a lot of different things to lock onto here. So my suggestion is use green gaff tape. You can use any color tape that you want. If you're struggling with the green gaff tape for whatever reason, maybe your lighting just doesn't make them pop good enough, you can use white. Just know that it's going to be more difficult in post-production to remove that. If you have a white tracking mark behind me and I have my beautiful blonde hair, it's going to be more of a challenge to remove that white tracking mark from behind my light colored hair than if it's green, right? So a couple different things. We got to get the camera track, but also we want to remove our tracking marks. If we shot outside or in here, we don't need to make tracking marks. Sometimes you have to, like in the example of putting those robots on that concrete floor that I showed. Maybe the floor is just too smooth. Maybe this desk is just too smooth, right? There's no features in it, so we need to introduce tracking marks into the environment. You still might need to do something like that. But on a busy surfaces like out on the street out there, there's plenty of things to lock onto for the software. And actually this leads into the assignment for next week is I want you to come with 2 different types of footages for next week. You don't have to necessarily shoot them yourself if you're not in a spot where you can do that. But I want you to come with some on-location footage. Just go back down to the street and film something. That's it. Done. It could be more advanced than that, but that's all I'm asking for. And ideally, some green screen stuff. If you can't get green screen stuff, you can use what I'm using in class next week. That's fine. Or you can find green screen footage online somewhere and use that. And we'll do both techniques next week. These slides are in the syllabus, so you can refer back to them. This guy this was one person's suggestions. They really like dots, never X's. I usually do squares. I just rip the gaff tape up, rectangles, slap it up on the background. This person likes white dots because they really pop off the background. They're easy to track. And they also show up during a lot of camera movement, a lot more so. How big do they need to be? Big enough to register on the camera. Bigger is better to a point because they're more visible to the camera. But at a certain point, you're creating more work for yourself in post-production to remove those marks. How many do you need at one time? I circled in orange there. This is very important and something that I think a lot of students in this class historically have forgotten. They'll go and shoot on green screen. They'll slap up like 3 tracking marks, think they're good to go. They'll be all excited about what they shot, and then they'll take it into After Effects and realize that, it just fails. It's not tracking. You need at any one time to be able to see at a minimum. This person says 9 markers on camera at one time. I would say 6, but more is definitely better. What I mean by that is wherever the camera is looking, this is more on green screen because, again, outside or in the real world, there's a lot more markers around. We don't need to worry about that. But on green screen, wherever the camera is pointing, I should be able at any time to be able to point out 9 markers. If it's a square, 4 corners of the square, that's 4 markers right there, right? And space them out too. Spacing them out helps a lot. What else do we got here? Yeah, some people like crazy shapes because they work better with a lot of motion blur. This guy just really loves circular dots. Oh, also a cool suggestion. The dots don't have to be physical. You could use a projector to project dots. Cool stuff. I've never done that personally, but well, seems like it would work. Unless you're using a smokes machine, and then that would be bad. That's not going to show up then. But let me give you an example back here. I didn't watch it. Show you one more BTS video that has a lot of green screen in it. Where's this at? Yeah, here. This was a project shot with 0 budget. This just in case. You'll see some green screen here in a second. So those are my dots that I would usually use on a personal project that doesn't have a DP and a technical director on set handling these things. That's a 12-foot roll paper with tracking marks on it. Where's that? And a very enthused assistant sitting over there in the corner. Something like this is probably what I imagine for us downstairs. We don't have the 12-foot roll of paper hung up yet. They're still figuring out logistically how to do that. We have a 9-foot roll of paper on a crossbar right now, but 12-foot is going to give us a lot more room to work with. Your person will be able to put their arms out instead of having to be like this. So something like this, see how it's covered with tracking marks? The floor, the background, do they have to be in lines? No. I just like to stay organized. Some more here. Yeah, close-up tracking marks. There should be some camera movement here. There's a little camera movement there, handheld. There's not any dramatic camera movement in this video. No, that's handheld a little bit. Yep. Questions about tracking? As we do it, there will definitely be questions. Right now, it's kind of academic. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about the camera that we have here. So this is a Blackmagic 6K Pro cinema camera. This comes in 2 different versions. This camera is $2,500, not including the lens, which is another $1,000. DSLRs are actually a lot more expensive than a decent video camera like this. There's also a 4K version, which is cheaper too, $1,200. This camera comes in a Pro version, which is $500 more than the cheaper version. It has a little bit more features. We just have the Pro version because I told them to buy the Pro version because I'm a Pro. Whatever. You will be able to check this out from the ER, the IDM ER. Still work in progress on exactly if there's going to be an equipment room that's dedicated to the media commons on the second floor. This is brand new as far as the second floor goes. So it's a work in progress. You said you're going to work down there, right?
I am working.
As of this week, right?
Yeah.
Brand new.
Yeah.
Questions? Yeah. If we have questions, we'll ask them. The guy showed up earlier today. They couldn't find the camera. My key card didn't work. It was a little bit of a mess, but it'll work itself out and it'll be all right. We got some lovely student assistants to help us out, and we got one in class, so that's awesome too. Sorry to put pressure on you. But we'll have this camera available to use. Do you have to use that camera? I don't care. Is this camera probably better than any camera that you're going to use otherwise? Probably yes. Using your phone, we've talked about why this is not a good idea. It's compressed footage. It's motion blurred footage. You usually can't control individual things like, usually you can control focus, but things like aperture and shutter angle, shutter speed, you give up a lot of that control when you use something like this. Is this easy to use? Absolutely. Because then you don't have to check out the case and do all the stuff and all that. So we have a nice camera to use, which wasn't always the case for this class. Will everything we do work with the DSLR? Absolutely. But like we talked about last week with the green screen, that sort of compressed video footage, less ideal. This will shoot in camera raw or even ProRes. The camera's pretty straightforward. Again, all these slides are online if you want to refer back to this. I suggest just checking the camera out and getting familiar with it. We're not going to spend a ton of class time teaching you how to use the camera. Okay. We just have too many other things to talk about. But hit the buttons, turn it on, hit the buttons, hit record. Done. A little bit more detail than that. So this has power in the case, obviously, has full-size HDMI out. It has a big old monitor on the back, which is nice compared to a lot of other monitors, but full-size HDMI out. This has USB-C in on it, so we can record to an SSD. This is I actually don't know how big this is. I think it's a 1 terabyte drive. And then we have a couple 64 gigabyte SD cards. I really like these Sony Tough cards. They're great. If you have SD cards of your own, that's fine. They just need to be a certain speed to be able to shoot some of the resolutions on this camera. These are V90 and Class 3 SD cards. They have 300 megabyte write and read, or you just use these. If you're using these, download the stuff, obviously, because the next person's going to format and overwrite all your stuff. Goes without saying. Lots of different features here that we can use. You can control the focus from the camera. You can control the aperture from the camera settings. We have a zoom lens on here, 18 to 35 millimeter lens on here. Also has neutral density filters. I don't think we'll really have to use those. If you don't know what a neutral density filter is, it's basically like a black camera lens that just allows you to have wider depth of field in bright situations, or more depth of field in bright situations. So normally in a bright situation, in order to get proper exposure, you'd have to crank your aperture up, making everything in focus. What if you wanted really shallow focus? Probably won't use that. Storage media, talked about that. All comes in this kit. Everything's in the kit. There's also a card reader in the kit too. This camera shoots high resolution, and if we're shooting 60 frames a second, we'll fill up this terabyte hard drive in 2 hours. So they're big files. Okay, it wouldn't be a bad thing for you to have your own SSD to record to, unless you want to do the file transfer dance. Although I know that after shoots, the last thing you want to do is wait an hour or two for all the files to transfer That sucks. So plan ahead. It really depends on the resolution that you're shooting in. Should you shoot in 6K? I think that's overkill. But I'm not going to stop you. Of course, it's always the person with the MacBook Air that wants to shoot in 6K. Bounds of reason. We have, there's a rig that this camera comes in that allows us to mount stuff to it. I'm going to reconfigure the rig, but it's just a little snap-in thing here that the SSD will snap into, and then you can run the cord into the port. Just stuff to be able to screw onto the camera. I suggest if you're using this hard drive right now, or at least it was, it's formatted to exFAT. This is important if you are a PC user and you want to be able to use the footage on a PC. You should format the hard drives to exFAT, not, what is the Mac one? HFS, right? Not NTFS if you're doing Windows. exFAT. exFAT works on Mac and PC. Yeah, not OSX extended. If you format to OSX extended and then you go to look at the files on your Windows computer, Windows is going to be like, I don't see a hard drive. Unless you install like Mac Drive or something like that. So format the hard drive as exFAT. So resolution, codecs, and quality. This camera shoots a lot of stuff. It will shoot 6K in Blackmagic RAW, which is, it's basically it's not a DNG sequence. It's a proprietary Blackmagic format, RAW format. And that will shoot 6K at a maximum of 50 frames a second. And then there's a couple other different resolutions. You can shoot ProRes. Which honestly, I would probably suggest shooting ProRes. It's smaller file sizes. Unless you really need the RAW, I would suggest shooting just ProRes 422. So ProRes tops out at 4K. You can also do 1080 if you want to do 1080. I would not suggest shooting 1080. I would shoot 4K at a minimum. 3840 by 2160. ProRes, talked about that. So on the back of the camera, we can select all these things. You can shoot ProRes 444 too, HQ. Or actually, I think it's 422 HQ. Well, HQ is the highest quality. And then 422, and then LT, and then proxy 422. Click on Blackmagic RAW, you get a whole bunch of other options. Here's all the resolutions that you can shoot around from. Blackmagic RAW, like I said, it's a proprietary format that Blackmagic has made. When you're in Blackmagic RAW mode, you can choose to have a consistent bitrate or a consistent quality, and then different proportions of the bitrate. Basically different levels of compression. If you've ever shot on a nicer camera before, you may notice that the footage is flat, right? It's not very contrasty, the colors aren't right. A lot of you will probably look on the back of this camera and be like, whoa, why is it so flat? This looks ugly. I don't like this. That's by design, because it's not graded yet. This camera, at least it was set up to use a LUT, a lookup table, to put the proper colors on it. But it's by design to shoot flat raw footage like this so that we can push and pull the colors. When you do a color key, you should grade for the green screen so that you can pull that color key. Pulling a color key from this flat green color right here, really difficult. So you can grade that. You could grade specifically for the key, allow that to pull the matte from, and then you could put your matte back on your ungraded footage and use the original footage. After we grade the footage, we will get all of our lovely colors back and more. That's where we get all that cinematic flavor with color grading. This is the LUT that I suggest using with this camera. This is on here right now. Actually, during break, I'm going to look to make sure that it's still on here. This will make the raw video footage not look flat. It will make it look pretty much how it does with our eyes, for your sake. But because it's raw, just like with raw still photos, you can change the LUT on demand. The colors are not baked into the image. Another thing to note, I don't think we're going to be switching out lenses in here and stuff, but this camera has a cropped sensor, which means that a 50 millimeter lens on this camera is not actually 50 millimeters because we're using only a fraction of the sensor. It's a 1.5 crop factor. So this could be problematic if you didn't have like a nice space like we do downstairs and you're trying to pull back and you have a wide angle lens already, but it's cropping in on that wide angle lens, so it's not really taking advantage of the whole thing. But I think we'll be okay with it. On a DSLR, at least most DSLRs, 50 millimeters is 50 millimeters because it's a full frame sensor camera. And on even nicer video cameras, they're full frame. Yeah, crop sensor idea. So instead of using the full edges of the circle, we only use a portion of it, and that gives us a zoomed in factor. For your sake, you're going to look on the back of the camera. You're going to pick the appropriate focal length. It's going to look good. You're going to hit the record button. You don't need to worry about any of this. All pocket cinema cameras have crop factors. Exposure. Little photography 101 here. The exposure triangle. It's all about light. If we take light away from one of these features, be it the opening of the lens with the aperture, or how long we leave that shutter open, or how sensitive we make the digital sensor or the film grain in the film that we're using. If we take away from one of these, we need to add light back into another one to keep our exposure the same. At one point, we had a light meter in the ER. I don't know if there still is. Does anybody know if there is a light meter in the ER still? We can check. There was, but I think it might have gotten misplaced or stolen. Light meter, really useful thing to have because otherwise you're just eyeballing it, which is not always accurate. But a light meter would tell you exactly the values that you would need to plug into your camera. So for those of you that are used to shooting with cameras, you might be familiar with shutter speed, right? How long does that shutter stay open and let light in before it closes again? With video cameras, it's a similar sort of concept, but a little bit of a different mechanism because it's a video camera. We talk about shutter angle. At the end of the day, they achieve a similar sort of a thing. The longer your shutter speed, the more motion blur that you're going to get, right? If I take a picture of you jumping up in the air, if I want to freeze you in midair, I need a really high shutter speed to be able to do that, depending on how fast you are. If I want to make the river of water look all misty and ethereal, I use a long shutter speed and it all kind of blurs together, right? Rather than freezing the motion. Similar sort of thing with a video camera like this, except that it's called shutter angle. Why is it shutter angle? Because we're not using a leaf shutter that just closes like a DSLR or even an SLR camera. We have this disc in these cameras that are spinning around. So what do you need to know as far as motion blur goes? The more degrees that your shutter angle is, the more motion blur that you're going to have. You're also allowing more light into the camera. So where you add more light, you might have to take away somewhere else. If you're adding more light in, then you're going to need to have a smaller aperture to be able to cancel that out. If you do, a lot of times I shoot at a shutter angle of like 45. It has like no motion blur, and has kind of a soap opera effect to it, where everything is not cinematic looking, but it works pretty good for green screen because, again, motion blur, problematic with green screen. Not impossible, but problematic. So on this camera, I would recommend using a shutter angle of less than 90, 45, something like that. But again, it's going to depend on your lighting, ultimately. Aperture. How much light are we letting into the lens? F-stops. Same thing here as on a regular camera. I'm not sure what this lens goes down to off the top of my head. I don't know, 2.8 maybe? No, I don't think we're that rich. Maybe a 4? 4 up to a 22. This camera will work with EF mount lenses, so Canon lenses, which is pretty cool. You don't need to use a completely new type of lens. I think there's a bunch of Canon mount lenses in the ER if you wanted to switch it out. This one's pretty all right. I mean, it's not like a $20,000 cinema lens, but it's fine. Editing. This camera works best with DaVinci Resolve because Blackmagic makes Resolve and they make this camera. Resolve is also just a lot better video editing program, personal opinion, than Premiere. It just takes better advantage of your GPU. If you're working with Blackmagic RAW, it's going to be a lot faster than Premiere. But you don't have to use Resolve if you don't feel comfortable learning another piece of software. Resolve is free. That's also another advantage. You don't need to make a sacrifice to the Adobe gods, Premiere and After Effects will work, but you're going to need, if you're using Blackmagic RAW, if you're using ProRes, you won't have to do this. If you're using Blackmagic RAW, you're going to have to install the codec, most likely. So you can install the codec from the Blackmagic support website. If you just type Blackmagic support, type in the search for Blackmagic RAW. 2.6 is the newest one, came out in June. If you install this, then Premiere and After Effects will be able to see those files. If you're using ProRes, you don't have to do that. If you're using Resolve, you don't have to do that because Resolve has them built in. Questions? All right, let's take a break. And in 20 minutes, let's meet down on the second floor. I'm not going to come back up here, so I would suggest taking your stuff. And we just leave from down there, if that's cool. Room 224. If you've never been down there before, you come off the elevator, you go into the cafeteria, go all the way to the windows, the J Street windows, and if you turn right, you will go by a desk with a student employee sitting down there. You go through double doors, kind of looks like an auditorium. We are in one of those rooms, the farthest one, 224. Okay? We'll be the only ones in there, so you can't miss us. We're a loud bunch. So see you soon.